ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Long Walk Talks. My name is David Hensley. I'm the owner and creative director of Long Walk Productions, and I am joined today by my two co-hosts, Long Walk Vice President Stan Wilson Lee and Long Walk Associate Producer Chris Barnes.
I feel so official.
And we are once again guestless. It is just going to be the three of us on today's episode, which is titled The Nostalgia Filter. For this episode, we are going to be discussing things that we loved when we were younger, but now recognize are probably bad. We're going to find out. Chris, why don't you start us off with something that you loved, but now might be bad?
Now, when you sent me the topic, you said movies in particular. Are you opening it up to anything?
Oh, no, yeah, it's anything that you... Because one of mine is not a movie.
Okay, because I kind of focused on movies, so I'll jump in. I'll save my worst for last, but we'll start with Batman Forever.
Okay. Yeah.
What was that, 94, 95?
95, yeah.
95. Yeah, so I definitely saw it in theaters.
Oh, I did too.
It's one of those things. It's not a great movie, but it's a fun one.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the few performances, thinking about it now, I've ever seen where Tommy Lee Jones just goes balls to the wall.
Mm-hmm.
He's manic in that film, and it's a rarity for him.
Yes, I also saw Batman Forever in the theater. At that point, I was 9 years old, and 9-year-old me loved it. Because it was Batman.
Yeah.
How can you not love Batman? But then, of course, Christopher Nolan's Batman films came along, and it just sort of... I will always love and appreciate Tim Burton's first Batman film, and I love Michael Keaton in it. But Christopher Nolan's Batman films kind of came along and erased, not really erased, replaced those films, in my opinion.
Ideally, I'd want a combination of those two, because I get grounded Batman and then what Nolan did, and I like it.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the more amped up parts of it too. I want a bridge between those, to be honest.
Well, I hadn't watched Batman Forever in a long time until many years ago. I think it's been about a little over 6 years at this point. I was dating a girl who used to work at Blockbuster, if that gives you any indication of how long ago this was. And she got a whole bunch of free rentals every week. And one night, she came home with Batman Forever. And we started watching it, and I was like, oh my God, this is terrible.
It is. I mean, it's not good. Now, it's better than what followed, but...
Oh, almost certainly.
It's like, this is also peak Jim Carrey, manic Jim Carrey, so it's like...
No, I do remember even watching it again and recognizing how terrible it is. Val Kilmer makes a really fucking great Batman.
Mm-hmm.
That's just about all that movie really had going for it.
It was Clooney that had the nipples, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, bat nipples.
But because I enjoyed Val Kilmer as Batman as well. But I enjoy Val Kilmer. He's that style of actor that has a personality to any of the characters that he does, and it's very distinct from anybody else who's played that character. George Clooney tried to do a combination of himself and what's his face,
Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton for his version, but I'm a huge fan of the Batman Returns, the second one.
Mm-hmm.
I think Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman is.
Yeah, a lot of people hate that film, and it certainly does devolve into a bit of silliness at the end.
Oh, excuse me? No. That movie is perfect.
DeVito's Penguin and Pfeiffer's
I'm thinking
Catwoman
specifically of the Penguin funeral at the
I'm
end.
thinking specifically of penguins with rockets strapped to their back. That's awesome.
Isn't it? It's like the Flying Monkeys and Wizard of Oz and shit, man.
You know, it was all...
I didn't know there was legitimate backlash on that film. Fuck you if you hate it.
A lot of people don't like it. I like it perfectly fine. It feels more comic book Batman.
It's Silver Age Batman.
Yeah.
It's
all the
definitely
way
Justice
up,
League.
all the way up into the point where the actual penguins hold a vigil for him and act as pallbearers after he dies. Penguins take up his body.
They slide him into the water, don't they? They give him a
Oh yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
It's a burial at sea.
Yeah, essentially. But in my head, I just have this mental image of penguins lifting up Danny DeVito.
I think they kind of do. They kind of slide him. I think.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about.
I agree with
No, that is what we're talking about now. It's going to be
the Nolan
60 minutes of penguin vigil.
The Nolan, I guess. Well, I guess Nolan didn't do Frank Miller version, but
Well,
It kind of did the year
Ish,
one-ish
yeah.
kind of Batman.
I think
Although-
I think his did redefine, and then of course the second in that series with Heath Ledger as the Joker, man, that redefined, and I'm sorry, it did supplant Nicholson's Joker for me. So
Very different beasts. I will always love Jack Nicholson as the Joker, but yeah, Heath Ledger was a completely different animal.
But if I can steer us back to
Batman Forever.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. You get any of us talking about Batman, it's going to get off topic very quickly.
oh my goodness, with and one of the things that will cement that is it's like not a great movie, but fun is also the soundtrack.
Isn't that where we get Kiss from a Rose?
Yep, that's exactly where we get it from. It's the first time I heard the Flaming Lips. They had the song "Bad Days" on the soundtrack.
Now, was it Batman Forever, or was it Batman and Robin that gave us the Smashing Pumpkins? The end is the beginning is the end.
It is Batman Forever.
Okay.
It was the original version that the faster version, and then they flipped it for Watchmen.
Yeah. Well, there are two versions.
There
that
is, yeah.
That soundtrack is bookended with the end is the beginning is the end, and then the last one. I'm trying not to screw this up. The beginning is the end is the beginning. I think I flipped those.
That might
But
be.
yeah, there's two versions of that song on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And I loved that song when it first came out, and then Watchmen brought it back and reminded me of how great it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, Batman Forever.
Batman.
I think the one thing I really still hate about that movie in retrospect is Riddler in a bodysuit and not a suit.
Oh
That's
yeah, that
right.
weird
Okay,
spandex
yeah.
with this fucked up hair,
Pink hair. He had like pink hair towards the end of the
pink
movie.
Marge Simpson hair.
Yeah. But honestly, I know.
But you gotta, Jim Carrey, Arnold Schwarzenegger, all in the same movie,
I think.
And
No,
Well, no,
no.
Schwarzenegger was Batman and Robin.
Yeah, you're thinking of Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones was Two-Face in that movie.
and
and
Forever, right?
Yes.
So it was Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones.
I honestly think Tommy Lee did that to keep up with Jim Carrey. Because he can't out Jim Carrey at this stage in his life, but Tommy Lee Jones went for it, and I will always enjoy. Yeah, there's a line from that movie that I still like to quote. It's like one of those things I can't quote in context because it's something you can't really. But it's like when he throws Two-Face throws Batman out of the helicopter he's in, and he goes, "And this time have the good taste to die."
No, I do want you to go around quoting that completely out of context.
It'll pop up in my head every once in a while, and I just yeah.
I want you to say that the next time you're picking up your fast food order. Stan?
This is gonna be awesome. Something that I loved and I still love, but the original Porky's and Porky's 2 would be my.
That interestingly enough popped up on a lot of because to get an idea of what other people think, I typed into Google movies that didn't age well, and that popped up on a lot. Now I've never seen it, so I don't have a context for it, but
The original Porky's is Bob Clark, so it
Right.
does have pedigree, and I think it's a great. I mean, I believe that without Porky's, we don't have American Pie, stuff like that, because
oh, absolutely, I can agree with that.
the idea of
I think they
hardcore coming of age films.
I think they openly I think they mentioned that before. It's like it's one of those in the tradition of kind of movies.
Yes, and I mean, of course, the American Pie films are much more are
Finessed.
made more finessed, but
Despite the fact that he sticks his dick in a pie.
but the
That
the
takes
humor,
finesse, Chris.
the low humor is on par, it's
Right,
the same.
exactly.
It's just Porky's is more low budget, and it's more looks a little more sloppy because of budget considerations, and because it was made in the very probably late 70s, early 80s. So and American Pie had the gloss, of a big budget film, so we give American Pie the respect. I still think Porky's kind of holds up, but in the sense that Smoking the Bandit still holds up and stuff like that.
It's one
you'll definitely notice the date issues.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
But the idea of the humor is still nobody's more of a fan of freshmonic and sophomore humor than I am. So it's like I was talking last episode about loving schlock, and Porky's would be
prime dick and fart jokes.
Prime dick and fart jokes.
That's what I was gonna say. The same thing is like it's like a time capsule movie, like Airplane and Caddyshack. They still hold up because they're still funny.
Yes.
But you look at them, it's very much like in its time period.
Yeah, Animal House is up there like that as well.
Yeah.
And
Another movie that's hit on a lot of those lists were like, oh, look at how horrible these things are by today's standards. Well, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and
Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh,
Anybody?
that I mean, although what we talk, I mean, okay, so Porky's doesn't exist without an Animal House, granted.
Of course not.
But the idea that Revenge of the Nerds, American Pie films, all came out directly because of something like Porky's, and Porky's 2 is definitely like Smoking the Bandit 2, where it's definitely just, oh, let's continue this, but there's some specific things about Porky's 2. So probably in my case, the guilty pleasure is Porky's 2 because it doesn't compare to the original, and it probably doesn't hold up at all now. But I will still crack up like a motherfucker because of the because of its blatant.
There's still something there for you.
Yeah, and its blatant love of the original.
It's kind of like why I love it. I'm
And
probably,
they make Cherry a major portion of the movie.
That's kind of why. It's kind of like I'm probably in the minority who also enjoys Airplane 2, the sequel.
Exactly.
Because it is basically a retread of the first one, and the Zucker brothers and them weren't involved. They just basically remade the movie and added different elements. But it's like
And put it in space.
Yeah, it's still funny to me though.
Yeah.
You guys know Moonraker, right?
Yes.
I know of it. Yeah.
Moonraker was the first Bond film I saw in a theater, and
I'm so sorry.
That probably that's the Bond movie that nobody likes, and that introduced me to Jaws. Richard Keel's Jaws.
Yeah, no, not the movie Jaws, the character.
The character Jaws.
How'd they get that shark in space?
But it was James Bond in space, and I love it. It's probably one of my top 4 Bond films, and 2 of them are probably, top 2 are probably the Roger Craig versions, but Daniel Craig versions. But
did you just say Roger Craig?
Yeah,
did you combine Roger
He's
Moore
the
and Daniel
1984
Craig?
pitching coach of Detroit Tigers. I was giving him props.
Oh my God,
But
sports.
Daniel Craig.
It's the second episode in a row in which you try to engage me and Chris on a sports topic.
I love sports. The wetter, the better.
Oh my God.
What?
I hope the
That
mic
was Chris. By the
I
way.
I just
hope-
got us an explicit.
I hope the mic is picking up my frown. It is very.
Yeah, you're frowning very loudly.
So if I had an honorable mention to Porky's 2 as a guilty pleasure, I still love Moonraker. So.
All right, legit.
Oh God, I need a Kleenex.
So you're
Somebody help
first.
me. I have to go get tissue.
Oh
again,
my
I'm sorry.
God.
Once again, Stan is going to get tissues, and I'm just going to
It's gonna
keep
become
talking.
a tradition.
I'm not going to look at him this time in case he decides to do his Sasquatch walk past the door.
You're gonna have to repeat this because I want to know what your guilty pleasure is.
We'll still be talking about it when you
I
get back.
don't really classify these as guilty pleasures so much, to be honest. It's
Well,
like,
I almost called this the guilty pleasure episode.
well, see,
but
I would do that in the future, but we could do that like I would call them the guiltless pleasures, like the stuff is bad but you love.
all right. Well, mine is weird.
This is kind of meant to be reflective,
Yeah, mine is weird, and you shouldn't expect anything less from me. This is a movie that I love, and I will absolutely argue the merits of, but it's one that me and the host of This Is a Work, David Two Dogs Hayes, always get to an
that guy.
argument. Yeah, we always get into an argument about it whenever I bring it up. The original 1987 classic, RoboCop. I was introduced to this film way too young. My wife likes to say that I did not have a childhood because I was
say it
watching
too.
shit like this when I was like 5 and 6 years old. Instead of cartoons, I was watching things like RoboCop and Terminator.
You know, to a degree, I understand because like when I was growing up, I was one of those quiet, bookish kids, and I was like, my mom felt like I was more mature for my age than I was. So I did get to see things that were probably I shouldn't have growing up. I didn't. She didn't let me dive. Now she didn't let me dive straight into that stuff. But I know when I got up towards 8 or 9. And I had like birthday party, like sleepovers. Like she would rent like R-rated movies for us.
Yeah.
That's how I don't remember any of it, but that's how I remember I saw the movie Man's Best Friend, the horror movie about the genetically altered dog.
Awesome.
But yeah, going back to RoboCop.
Well, I am perfectly willing to acknowledge that maybe it is the fact that the nostalgia filter is what makes this movie so great to me. I can also argue in its favor that it is a legit good movie. But I seem to be...
I think you're in the majority on this one, though. I mean,
Yeah.
to be honest, like, flaws and all, people like, this is a classic.
Yeah. I love it. It's up there in my nostalgia filter love. So, RoboCop, 1987, Paul Verhoeven.
I cannot think of that movie now and not think of the Imgur post. It was RoboCop, Stan.
Welcome back.
But my favorite Imgur post. There's a girl. There's a user on that.
RoboCop.
A user on that site showed off a T-shirt she had. It says, "Remember that time RoboCop shot a dude in the dick?"
Yes.
And she ended up going to a convention and getting a picture with Peter Weller in that shirt.
Oh, that's fantastic. Katie sent me a picture of somebody on Instagram wearing that shirt, and I want it. I don't know where Mad Monster Party is just about the only place I could wear it to. But yeah, remember when RoboCop shot that dude in the dick?
I know I'm late to the party, but why is that because
I'm
it
perfect-
considered still?
Oh, I'm perfectly willing to recognize, like I was telling Chris, that it might just be the fact that I saw this so young and I loved it as a kid.
Because it was violent and dirty, and
Yeah.
Nancy Allen was hot.
Well, I don't know
For
about
kids,
that.
that's not the priority. It's
It's RoboCop shooting dudes in the dick.
True that.
I mean,
But-
and you cannot even if you can argue that it's a bad movie, you can't argue that it's had a lasting pop culture presence, and it's got multiple memorable lines, including you have 20. Well, I think this is from the sequel, but you have 20 seconds to comply. Dead or alive, you're coming with me.
No, those are both from the first
Are
one.
they? Okay.
Yeah. Now, if we want to talk about the second one, I will defend that film as well.
I really don't, but
I really do think RoboCop 2 is a great film as well. Now, I know that I'm in the minority on that one.
and then of course your move, punk, is like
Your move, Creep.
creep.
Yeah.
That's right. I was a punk or creep. I took a gamble.
Is it me, or did you tell me that what's on Netflix right now, or Amazon Prime, or whatever?
Is the director's cut. Chris is actually the one who pointed that out
Yeah,
to me.
they put it up there. Yeah.
It is the director's cut.
Supposedly it's the original X-rated cut.
Oh, yeah, it is. I
'Cause-
watched it not too long ago, and it's, if you've never seen it, the
Because
two...
I may have got the replacement because I went looking for it and it just seemed like it was listed as the R-rated.
Well, you know that it's the X-rated cut because the boardroom scene where Kenny gets shot goes on for about 10 seconds longer, and you see his chest just get turned to pulp by the ED-209. And then when Murphy gets shot up by Boddicker's gang, the first shot they take after they blow off his hand, he stands up, and one of the punks shoots him with a shotgun in the arm and blows his fucking arm off. And they built this amazing prosthetic that you just see his arm explode off of his body.
Wow.
And then they proceed to shoot him up as normal in the theatrical version. But then the difference between that and the X-rated version is the kill shot, or what's supposed to be the kill shot, when Boddicker shoots Murphy in the head. They built this special prosthetic of Peter Weller designed to turn his head and move his mouth and writhe around in pain. This is an animatronic specifically so that the camera could pan around him writhing in pain as Boddicker comes up and shoots him in the head. And they obviously couldn't do it really with Peter Weller, but it was too explicit to make it into the theatrical cut. So you know you're watching the X-rated version if one, that boardroom scene goes on for a long time. Two, if Murphy gets his fucking arm shot off.
And then his face.
And then the very explicit close-up of him getting shot in the head. I really can't... I think it's mainly those three things that made it X-rated. I can't remember a whole lot of extra differences between that and the theatrical cut.
That's such a weird line.
What?
Just those three things.
Oh my God, it makes an already violent film even more violent. Because we're shown, like especially with Kenny in the boardroom scene getting shot up by the ED-209,
Well,
that's
already
already...
criminal brains and robot bodies.
Yeah. Well, once again, you're thinking of RoboCop 2.
Aren't I? Damn it.
ED-209 was just the extremely malfunctioning...
My knowledge is patchwork because I've only seen like clips and bits of each one. I've never sat down and watched them through.
Well, if you've never seen the film or the director's cut, they introduce ED-209, the enforcement droid, at this board meeting where he's supposed to be like the brand new thing, and they ask this low-level executive who's way too excited to volunteer for this, point a gun at it in a threatening manner. So he does, and he's told, you better put it down. So he throws the gun on the ground, at which point the ED-209 is supposed to stand down and doesn't, and just keeps issuing, you have 20 seconds to comply, you have 10 seconds to comply, and then opens fire on him with 50 caliber rounds. He gets blown back onto this table, and the ED-209 just keeps shooting him in the chest until it's unplugged. So in the theatrical version, he gets shot several times and falls back, and they unplug him. They unplug the ED-209. In the X-rated version, it just keeps going, and his chest just keeps getting pumped full of bullets.
Such a failure. I mean, you waste that many bullets on one person. That is just driving the cost up.
I know. Well, it was Detroit in the 80s. What do you expect? Anyway, I've talked way too long about RoboCop. Chris, your next nostalgia.
Well, we are going to dive into my number two, and my number two is Demolition Man.
Yes.
Demolition Man.
It's another one of those movies it's fun enough that you don't until way later go, wow, that's not
Sly
good.
and Wesley?
Uh-huh.
Demolition Man?
Yeah. Also, one of my favorite How Did This Get Made podcast episodes. It's like,
Because it's Sly and Wesley.
It's fun. It's a fun movie. It's not great, but it throws a lot of weird and interesting concepts in there. Mm-hmm. Just because it's like, let's just have fun with this concept.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about a movie where the whole controversy of, is there too many explosions in movies?
Was that ever a controversy?
But it is
because this came out around the same time, if I'm remembering correctly, that Michael Bay came onto the scene.
It did, but
the man who took too many explosions up to 11
as a challenge.
But Demolition Man, as you know, a non-big studio movie like Michael Bay's gets to have, is, and we'll probably talk about him later, because guess what, he might be on my list.
That sounded more threatening than it needed to be.
Probably, yeah.
Because the almost altruistic, no reason for things to happen in Demolition Man. Is that not true? It's like it just, blow it up.
I've never actually seen this film, but I have a vague knowledge that isn't Taco Bell way more important to Demolition Man than it should be?
Unless it's the European version. But yeah, So the basic, I'll break it down real quick.
Cheese.
I think it's something you would enjoy, and not like fall in love with, but just enjoy, because it's a very interesting and cynical, kind of a snide, cynical take on the future. Not in a downbeat way, but it's just so Stallone plays this super cop where things have kind of already going to hell in America, because it's like it takes place in like
2018.
No, it's like barely a year ahead of its release, where like shit has broken down in like LA so bad that like gangs of like are running rampant, too horrible. So
and this is post New Jack City Wesley Snipes.
Yes.
But pre Blade Wesley Snipes. So
How
Where
is
did
that
Wesley-
important to the conversation?
it's where Wesley Snipes went wrong, because he was like the man for.
I'd argue
a
that
little while.
tax evasion is where Wesley Snipes went wrong.
But yeah. So Stallone is a super cop basically trying to take down Simon Phoenix. Wesley Snipes' character is a gang leader who has supposedly taken a bust of hostages at the beginning. So he goes in, stops Simon Phoenix, causes a shit ton of collateral damage, and then
Because it was the 90s.
he gets blamed for the hostages dying. They were technically Stallone's character finds out, they were already dead to start with. Like, they were never still alive, but he gets blamed for it. And so just like Simon Phoenix, he gets put on ice, which means they get frozen. And while they're on ice, they're getting rehabilitated, which they're having stuff pumped. They're having like lessons and stuff pumped in their brain to make them better, nicer people. Well, jump into the future when Stallone's let out. There's like an earthquake and stuff that happened in between, and society's been reshaped by the mayor of this area they're living in to be, they're like nicer, placid people who don't really have much of a concept of like forceful violence anymore. Also, Rob Schneider's in this movie. I'm just
He
gonna toss that
is.
out.
What?
Sandra Bullock is too, and
What?
and who else is it Mark Ruffalo? No, it's no, it's not Mark Ruffalo.
Mark Wahlberg.
No. I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now, but yeah, they're also in this movie as cops who, again, it's like the police force is basically they have no concept of like using force to stop violent incidents. Like, violence is kind of just unheard of at this point. Well,
Benjamin Bratt.
that's it.
Benjamin Bratt is in.
And Dennis Leary. I'm looking at the IMDb.
Yeah, there's
This is
underground rebels.
fascinating.
There's underground rebels who are against the whole the
Stepford Wives.
the kind of like
Anti-violence platform.
well, it's not anti-violence so much as like a submissive, subdued society who doesn't really know how to put up a resistance to things they don't like. So basically people have been pacified. And
There is also a man in this movie credited as Rhino Michaels. Mm-hmm. That's not his character's name. This actor's name is Rhino Michaels.
cool. That's long. But
That's all I got.
so Simon Phoenix is unfrozen, and it turns out he hasn't been quote unquote rehabilitated. He's been unfrozen, and he's just going about wreaking havoc. That's why they unfreeze Stallone, actually, to go after him and stop him, to figure out.
Because he's taken advantage.
Yeah.
Or Simon is taking advantage of the fact that everybody's placid and not wanting to fight
Yeah.
back. So. Yeah.
And so Stallone is also trying to adjust to this new world where you get fined for swearing, and you get automatic fines for doing things, having to figure out how to use the bathroom. After the restaurant wars, Taco Bell became the dominant, the only surviving like major food corporation.
This is brilliant.
And they are now the epitome of fine dining in the future. In Europe, it was Pizza Hut, I believe, because they don't have Taco Bell in Europe.
Royale with cheese.
And that was one of the things. Classic music, like classic oldies music in the future. Old commercial jingles. They would come on, and you would see the adult police people singing along to old-fashioned commercial jingles.
Who directed this?
Oh my God! Who did?
Marco something. It wasn't a name that I recognized.
It was like a Mad Magazine take on what the future could be. It was like
80s and 90s movies were in love with this whole bad future concept, especially bad LA, because you were talking about crime-ridden LA in the 90s.
it kind of is like a satire of what LA culture could evolve into, or what they thought of it as.
I
Yeah.
immediately thought of Predator 2 and the opening LA as a war zone sequence.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, okay, so maybe I need to see Demolition Man
It's
now.
worth at least one check.
I mean, and you can see it for free now, so it's like.
Well, yeah.
It's worth at least one solid viewing. It's like it is an action movie. It is also campy fun in a way.
And now I want Taco Bell.
All right, well that was my. I'll toss it over to Stan
Nostalgia
now.
Filter.
Nostalgia filter. And again, I don't know if this will be considered a film that doesn't, but the Nightmare on Elm Street films.
No, I don't think that. I don't.
Because
that-
every time I see a Nightmare film, the original with Robert Englund style,
Maybe some of the sequels, but the original is pretty.
and I even like the second one, and especially now since we've been doing Mad Monster Party and stuff, going back and seeing the sleepaway camps, but the Nightmare stuff made me really happy when I first saw them, and they still continue to.
Because you hate teenagers.
I hate teenagers
and like murdering them in their sleep.
and like murdering them in sleep, which I am.
You heard it here,
do.
folks.
But just again, I was talking in the last episode about how I like being in the world, and when it's over, it just puts me back in the shit in real life. It's like the thing about Nightmare on Elm Street and Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger is that he invites you into this world. I mean, even the Freddy versus Jason stuff, as long as it's Freddy Krueger, I get a big smile on my face, and some of them may not hold up, whether because it's a soundtrack by Dokken, but or that the second one was an unnecessarily
Homoerotic.
Or a closeted homoerotic film, which if it would have just been open about its homoeroticism, it probably would have been considered one of the great stepping stones of horror ever. But
I love that the director of that film is like, no, that subtext, it's not really there. People are just reading too much into it. Meanwhile, Mark Patton is like, no. Everyone knew what was going on.
Yeah, we're like listening to Mark Patton at Mad Monster, and he's just like, it was totally.
Everyone knew we were making the gayest horror film ever made.
Even Robert Englund knew, it's like the whole, him coming out of my body, was.
He's inside me.
He's inside me, and it's like nobody had a problem with it, and.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is that our current world that we live in is so terrible, you'd rather spend some time in a world in which a sadistic child molester who was murdered and burned to death kills teenagers in their dreams?
He's hilarious.
Okay. I'm glad we cleared that up.
Have you heard his jokes? This is God, or
well, that's what's funny about the first film is he was not really a jokester in the first movie.
Exactly.
He got more and more silly as the films went on.
And I didn't have a problem with that, and I think that's one of the reasons why I consider this guilty pleasure of mine, and stuff that I loved the humor at the time I saw them, especially 3, 4, and 5, and then somehow Wes Craven, I believe, jumped onto that. So when he comes back for New Nightmare, he incorporated that as part of the whole, metacognition of the actors playing these parts. So he totally tied into the humor that the sequels brought into, even though the original may have been less. But the original Nightmare 1, Wes Craven's Nightmare 1, definitely was much more humorous than the remake.
Oh, yeah.
Which went full hardcore on the child molester burned by freaked out revenge-seeking parents, and it's like, and again, I'm like one of 9 people that liked the remake, and especially Jackie Earle Haley's performance of Freddy Krueger. I thought his performance was wonderful. But the thing with the originals, again, just being part of Freddy's world again, and it's like, and that's why I like the Ronnie Yu Freddy versus Jason, is because Jason Voorhees is fighting Freddy Krueger, and Freddy Krueger's cracking the same jokes that he cracked in 2, 3, and 4, and it's like, and the guy from Hurley from Lost gets chopped up in a cornfield.
That's not actually Hurley from Lost. He just looks eerily like him.
And that's
kind of like that.
I wanted
Freddy vs. Jason also has the Jason Mewes lookalike.
He does. It does. And I wish you wouldn't have. Man, that was so fun.
I'm sorry,
that it was
did
Hurley.
Did I ruin that for you?
Because I wanted to be Hurley.
It's
so bad.
definitely Hurley before he got to the island.
Before he got to the island.
Not even the actor playing Hurley. That's actually Hurley, the character from Lost.
But
Encountered Jason in a cornfield, went and played the lottery, ended up on an island.
But which could be a Freddy Island if you think about it.
Oh my God, we're not getting into that discussion.
But no, I love the Nightmare films, and I go back to those a lot, and if I need a smile, I love when chick is pulled through the TV set, or but and yeah, that sounds like sadistic Stan, disturbing Stan, but no, it's just there's just a sense of humor in a stylized.
I don't know where disturbing Stan is, but we need to carpet bomb it.
A stylized violence, comic book violence that is evident in especially the sequels. But then you go back, the first Friday the 13th had Kevin Bacon. Mm-hmm. Making Kevin Bacon famous. First Friday the 13th, or first Nightmare on Elm Street had who? Mr. Johnny Depp.
Oh yeah.
Making him famous, and having one of the great death scenes ever put on camera, and it's like, so just the folks that came from Nightmare on Elm Street came out. I mean, one of the Arquette sisters came out of, and I think she went on to win an Oscar. Yes, she did, because it's Patricia, right?
I'm pretty sure. That
went on to do Boyhood and win an Oscar for it. And then Heather Langenkamp, who's a wonderful, wonderful person. But again, it's stuff like Mad Monster taking me back to those old things and it's like, they shouldn't hold up. But for me, and the quality of good feels, even though it's, that the characters are not getting good endings, but I'm gonna. It's the Nightmare films, even though that some of them may not be seen as good as the others, but still, I love that series so much.
Horror is its own special category of this kind of thing, because it went from being those kind of like, okay, through nostalgia goggles, it's way better than it is, to them embracing that kind of novelty.
To fuck you, you're wrong if you think otherwise.
Yeah,
kind of mentality.
And also they kind of embrace that feeling of, but we like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. As soon as I brought up Freddy versus Jason, I was like, oh man, that should have been on my list, because I love Freddy versus Jason. That is a legit terrible film. Mm-hmm. I saw that in an oversold movie theater, and when I say oversold, I mean literally. There were people sitting on these steps going up the aisle.
It was such an attraction. That was actually technically my first Jason and/or Freddy movie.
Mm-hmm. I guarantee you, everyone in that theater had a blast.
Oh, we did, and it's to this day, it's one of my favorite movie-going experiences, because I'm sure it was a fire hazard. It was a safety violation. We were crammed into that theater like sardines, but everybody was laughing and clapping and booing and cheering. It was fantastic.
And Ronnie Yu, who did, he also did Bride of Chucky. He did one of the Chucky movies too, and I'm pretty sure it was Bride of Chucky. So he introduced Jennifer Tilly to the Chucky series and turned her into a doll
and revitalized
the series.
Was he in charge of the soundtrack on Freddy vs. Jason? Because I hated that soundtrack.
Oh yeah, no, that soundtrack's terrible. I don't think he is. But so my actual second entry onto the nostalgia filter list, I'm gonna make it weird again and take it back to the '90s again. I know. Beast Wars. The cartoon, the Transformers reboot from the 90s. I love this show. It lasted for 3 seasons. A couple of years ago, by a couple, I mean like 7 or 8, I got the box set of all 3 seasons, and I started watching it again. At this point, I was like 26 years old, going back and watching this cartoon from my childhood, and I was like, holy crap, the first season of the show is pretty bad. Like the first season was definitely aimed more for children than the latter two seasons, which got really fucking dark at points. But the first season, it hadn't really found its footing or its characters yet. It was much more kid-driven and definitely not as fun or as good as I remembered it being.
And they were really trying very hard to make CG happen.
Oh, yeah.
In the early days of it being viable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why there could only be like 5, I almost said Autobots and Decepticons, 5 Maximals and Predacons, like 5 or 6 of each at a time. Whereas the original Transformers cartoon, you had a dozen or more of each faction. But yeah, so that's mine. I'm still in love with the cartoon Beast Wars, even though the first season of it is pretty terrible. Either of you ever watched this cartoon? Am I alone here?
Here it was not, and honestly, it was kind of the bad CG that turned me off. But I would catch bits of it, I think either in the morning or after school, whenever they would air it, and I would see it, and it's like, no.
Oh.
Was there an original? Was there a Beast Wars version that was actually animation?
No, I think from the start
was it
was
all
just,
CG?
Yeah.
Because was there another similar thing?
There was a series later where it took place on Cybertron that involved. I think it was like kind of like in
Beast
line.
Machines.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Now that one is universally reviled by Transformers fans.
Right.
Because there was one. I swear it was I swear it was legitimate cell animation. But
Oh yeah, the Japanese sequel series, because the way the like I know way too much about this. The way the animation cycle for Beast Wars, the American cartoon, worked was it took a long time to animate episodes. And so when it started airing in Japan, like after the first season, I guess Japan's animation schedule has a much quicker turnaround and they want more content. So
they work them like dogs. They kill their people making these shows.
So between the first and second season of American Beast Wars, which were CG animated, they had cell animated, like traditional cartoon, like interquel seasons made.
That may be what I seen, but I actually was digging Beast Wars before I saw like any of the Transformers or Gundam style, you know. But in the sense of Transformers stuff, it would have been Beast Wars for me, and I remember seeing it in cell animation. I'm not sure about.
I think you somehow managed to watch the Japanese interquels.
And I'll say
I like that a lot.
And I'll say I'm not really trying to slag off on the hard work they did. I'm sure they worked really, really hard to try and with what they were working with. It's just like technology just wasn't where it needed to be to make that a viable thing, and it just didn't work as well.
The Japanese cartoon also got really weird because they were doing traditional cell animation. They didn't have the character restriction, so they just started throwing characters at the plot to the point where there was a Maximal, which was the Beast Wars equivalent of an Autobot, that was a raccoon, that was also a clock, that was also a robot. And if it sounds like I made any of that up,
no, I believe you.
He was a raccoon with a clock on his belly.
Yep.
A clock.
Yeah.
A clock bot.
Once again, I've talked way too much about
a clock
Beast
bot.
Wars.
Well, if we're moving on to me,
I could conservatively go on for another 30 or 40 minutes answering questions and talking about Beast Wars. But let's move on. Chris, what's your second?
I'm gonna shuffle mine a little bit, and I'm gonna roll off of what you were talking about, and it's gonna include the original Transformers cartoon, but I'm gonna throw in G.I. Joe and He-Man. All those syndicated cartoons, because I mean they came out after the point where they relaxed restrictions on advertising to children, so they could finally make these shows and just be toy commercials again. So these shows came out and they were like quickly put into production and quickly syndicated so that kids could watch them every day. And, and then have the ads in between where it was like, buy our play sets and toys. And it was very, and I know Transformers was pretty much imported, but the other two were like, I mean, they're classics in the sense that people do love them. There's still a legit fan base. They're still making these properties today. But you go back and watch those shows, and it's like, unless and the releases they've gone through and done a lot of correcting, there's a lot of shoddy animation and hastily thrown together stuff that's just, it's not great. There's some wonky writing in there, and it's just, you watch these shows and it's like, I love this growing up, and then you're just like, sometimes why?
Stan, you got any more nostalgia filtered loves?
What? I had a third one.
The Ravages of Time.
You have got to start writing these things down before we record.
I know I'm lackadaisical. I lack a days.
You were making fun of me earlier for using college words, Chris. It's not every day that you hear somebody use lackadaisical in a sentence.
I don't know if I could. I did say I was going to bring up Michael Bay in this.
You did threaten that, yeah.
But it's not necessarily nostalgic. But I will sit down and watch his Transformers shit, and because it's free, because they are really bad.
You don't want to talk about 1995's Bad Boys with Martin Lawrence and Will Smith?
Or Bad Boys 2.
Shit.
Classic.
Oh shit! Oh, you just remind me. Yes, I do, because you hate this. Day After Tomorrow.
Oh my god. God.
Is that one of the Emmerich films? That,
Yes, I hate
Day After
Roland
Tomorrow
Emmerich.
and it introduced us to Mr. Jake Gyllenhaal.
Okay, it didn't
Or Gyllenhaal.
introduce us
Well,
to
it
Jake.
did.
You like making wild claims. Jake Gyllenhaal had been in a lot of films.
Dave's not
Not a
going to let
lot.
you give this movie any credit for anything.
I mean, at the very least, Jake Gyllenhaal had become famous for Donnie Darko before.
Really? Who was Donnie Darko
Yes.
before?
Donnie Darko was 2003.
It was, because
Or
that's
no,
where I saw
earlier,
him for the
2000.
first
I'm
time.
not going to
You're
lie.
right.
I
Right.
am definitely in Dave's camp because this is one of my mom's favorite movies.
Day After Tomorrow is one of the
I like
greatest.
how we started off talking about Michael Bay, and somehow that correlated to
Roland Emmerich, Michael Bay.
we somehow slid further below.
Because didn't Michael Bay work for Roland Emmerich for a while, and that's where he got his influence to be nothing but
you're thinking of Michael Bay working for Jerry Bruckheimer.
True that. But so yes, Day After Tomorrow,
You
because
also
every
went from
time I watch that,
lackadaisical to true that.
I love it more and more, and I will keep coming to you and saying, "Oh my God, when the Earth freezes over and there's that big tidal wave and it swallows up the Empire or the Statue of Liberty," and
The science community is
and
weeping.
It is, but
That reminds me, have you seen Geostorm?
No.
it's probably the last Roland Emmerich disaster film that I just like, I gotta see it every time. I have the Blu-ray version. It was one of the first Blu-rays I ever got, and
Because you had to see that in HD.
Super
because
high
it's
def.
and it only cost like a $2.99 at used at it was one of
wonder
the, it was one of the Woody's purchases I made, first Woody's purchases I made when I moved here, but
You went to a music store to buy the this
was
story
used.
gets more frustrating
I'm
the
gonna
longer it goes
I'm gonna
on.
defend that because that's where I got my copy of Kung Pao Enter the Fist, and that's one of the best movies ever.
in the term of bang for your buck, oh my
Lord.
God, Day After Tomorrow, and it turned out it's like Rocky. It's like, because it's also, I bought it at the same time that I bought my copy of Rambo. Mm-hmm. So not
A
knowing,
much better film.
much better film, and we could have talked about that too. But seeing Rambo and Day After Tomorrow together, oh my God. But Day After Tomorrow, man, one of the great father-son quest.
Oh my God!
No,
Earth freezes
absolutely
over,
not.
and he has to come from the Arctic down to frozen over New York by foot, basically, and by we talked about the land tractors, the
The land tractors?
Tractors are land tractors.
no the trucks that have the tank
This hand motion you're
Yeah,
doing.
for the listeners at home, Stan is just making
The
a spinning
cats
motion
and
with it.
Shining.
Oh, those. Okay.
You
he
know,
means those
that's ba-
snowmobiles. From,
Yeah, the snow cat.
The snow cats. Basically, he takes a snow cat back from the Arctic to New York to save his son, who's
Those things go at like
entrapped
5 miles an hour.
It was awesome. It was heart wrenching. It was
Oh my
beautiful.
God.
and
You're going to go home to jerk off to the day after tomorrow after this, aren't you?
again.
Just do a double feature with Twister.
Twister. I didn't like.
Really?
I hated Twister.
You're insane.
Day After Tomorrow, the character development's brilliant.
This conversation is
Uh,
harrowing.
It's
This might be the prime example of the episode, though.
Yeah, no, this is a
Because he's actively defending this hard.
it's
and he's
a beautiful
hard
movie.
defending this.
It's a beautiful movie, man. It's a beautiful movie, and it's like, and I know it. I'm one of 3 people, I guess, now that like it. You know.
All right, well, we're going to transition from that into another horrible movie that I nonetheless love the way that you love The Day After Tomorrow. I saw this movie at the tender age of 15, The Fast and the Furious. This
Again,
is
how-
pure nostalgia
What
because
could you
to
possibly have against this long-running, venerable movie franchise that is still happening?
still
Yeah, there should be
going
6 days after
17
tomorrow, too.
years later. No, there do not need to be.
The
should be
Earth is
6.
pretty much fucked at the end of the first one.
Yeah, the first Fast and the Furious came out in 2001.
2001.
Yeah, 2001. Let that sink in as you watch them like race around. Again, I think, don't they go to the Arctic in number 8?
I don't,
Or something absurd.
You know, you're right. They do have a race.
go to the Arctic?
With like a
I know
submarine.
I know they race a submarine at some point. We went from
That was last year, so it's been
16 years.
16, 17 years. 16 years since from the first to the latest movie.
We went from a franchise of petty street criminals and souped up cars to
drag racing.
drag racing to world-renowned international heist masters.
Special forces and cars is like
Yeah, essentially. But that first film,
Triple X.
after that came out in
that's a different
2001,
beast.
every 15-year-old boy wanted a Mitsubishi or a Mazda with an enormous muffler and a spoiler and terrible decals on the
that what the
side.
kids are
And
calling it
I was
nowadays?
one of those
That wanted
boys.
an enormous muffler.
I loved the first Fast and the Furious, and I still do, solely because of how much I loved it when I was 15 years old.
You've seen all of them, haven't you?
they have
Except number 8.
they have the Star Trek syndrome where it's like you know which ones are the good ones and the bad ones.
Oh,
Shit, I could have
pretty
said.
much.
I could have said that too. The original cast Star Trek series I love as well.
The Fast and the Furious films, yeah, for a while there, it was pretty much every other film. Like Too Fast, Too Furious is terrible.
beginning
And
beginning the amazing naming convention.
Yes, that went completely off the rails.
But you like Tokyo Drift.
I think Tokyo Drift is a good movie. Four Fast, Four Furious. I can't
No,
remember.
it was just Fast and Furious, yeah.
That one was pretty bad.
And then Fast Five.
Fast Five is a legit terrible film that is really fun to watch because that's where they took the idea of drag racing petty criminals into heist experts and took it to its logical extremes.
Is that where they were jumping cars onto trains?
Yeah, I think that's near the beginning of the
And
movie.
what was the sixth one called? Because it gets weirder with the naming convention.
Six Fast, Six Furious.
No, it may as well. It may as well. There's
Isn't
Fast
six
Five,
is-
Furious.
6 is the first Paul?
no.
No,
Is that his last?
No, he did the sixth. He died between the sixth and the seventh
Seventh.
one.
Yeah, halfway into production of 7. The sixth one actually isn't terrible, whatever the hell it's called. But my God, Furious 7 was terrible, and I didn't bother to see the most recent one. Are you looking up what the sixth film was
I am
called?
like it's gonna bother. It's gonna honestly, it's gonna bother.
Stand
me a
by,
little bit.
listeners, because
It's-
now I have to know.
because-
I've seen 2 of them. I think Too Fast, Too Furious was the first one I seen, and I.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
But I like the one where all versions of the casts came back. So,
So that would've been 5.
The Rock version of the cast and the Vin Diesel version of the cast.
Well, 5 introduced
together.
The Rock to the series because it needed more muscle-bound men in it.
Because wasn't there like two legitimate versions of the cast, or was it Vin Diesel wasn't in all of them, was he?
No, he wasn't in the second one. He had a cameo at the end of the third.
But he came back for
I
the
think-
Rock one, right?
I think there was an idea at some point maybe to make it an anthology series, but then after that they were just like, "Nah, let's get everybody back."
Okay, so sadly 6 is like kind of generic. So we know up to that point it is
The Fast and the Furious,
Too
Too
Fast.
Fast, Too Furious.
the Fast and the Furious : Tokyo Drift. Fast and Furious, Fast 5. Fast and Furious 6 is just either listed as Fast and Furious 6 or Fast 6. I feel like it had a different title.
Yeah, it was something stupider.
Yeah, and then Furious 7.
And
The
then Fate of the Furious.
And now, coming next August,
there's gonna be
is the spin-off, Hobbs and Shaw.
Oh, that's right.
The Rock and Jason Statham are getting their spin-off.
That's right. Jason Statham is the.
And then they've got, for April 2020 and April 2021, Fast and Furious 9 and Fast and Furious 10. And those are supposed to be the end of the series. A series that by the end of it will have run for 20 years. 20!
So it's got about 10 years on the Avengers, then, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
They had a good
7 years because Fast and the Furious came out in 2001 and
Yep.
Iron Man came out in 2008.
Yep,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, so they're mine. That's The Fast and the Furious is terrible, and I will always love it.
All right. So if we're moving on to me, the reason I shuffled, I dropped in that past one was because I combined, I on the fly, I combined two of my, I tied them, and that is because they are Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat.
Street Combat Fighter.
Oh my God! So,
Mortal Street Combat Fighter.
You got another one in you?
No, I
Okay.
think I reached the logical extreme on that one.
Dungeons and Dragons
Oh my God!
on the street of fighting.
Yes, I combined these two because
Double Dungeons and Dragons.
because I for a fact was in theaters like opening weekend to see Mortal Kombat.
Yeah,
Two
I saw that
dragons in a
movie.
dungeon.
Had the soundtrack.
I saw the Mortal Kombat 3 times in the theater.
Oh my God! Yeah, like, and looking back on it, again, not a great movie.
Oh.
But it was fun.
Yeah.
Well, just seeing the live versions of those characters that you were fighting in the video game.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sub-Zero cast with a real person. It's like that. That in itself was fun to happen. And so they did try really hard to duplicate the styles of kills for the films that they had in the movies.
The Scorpion fight.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Get
down to the
over
point
here.
where Johnny Cage leaves an autographed picture of himself, just
Yep.
like in the game, after he kills Scorpion.
the
yes,
Goro
it was
nut
bad,
shot.
but-
Uh-huh.
Yes, it was bad, but they did a really legitimate attempt.
Sort of, but then when they're fighting, was this the first or the second one? When Reptile shows up,
Reptile shows up at the end of the first one.
Yeah, I think didn't they actually say Reptile in the voice when he
Yes.
shows up?
Yes.
They do the
Reptile.
intro. Yeah, like when you picked him off the character select screen.
Didn't they just do a reboot film just recently, and with like added enhanced, so they could actually do the duplications of the?
Now, there was a
Or-
series
or
a
is there
couple
a-
of years ago that
a
started
new
out as
video
shorts
Yeah.
that became super popular.
Yeah. And then of course Street Fighter. Now Street Fighter was one of those movies that I saw. I don't think I saw it in theater, but when I saw it as a kid, it was like it's like one of those things like I just enjoyed. It's like
That was
it's not
Jean-Claude Van Damme. Wasn't it?
yes,
As an all-American hero,
Colonel Guile.
Colonel Guile couldn't even be bothered to attempt an American accent.
Because at
No.
that point they could have got what's his face, the Jim Cotta dude, or the American
Literally anyone but Belgian.
Michael Dudikoff. They could have got him
That-
to do that character.
with iconic lines like "Are you okay, Guile?" It's like he says he's half dead, and Bison all dead. and Raul Julia in a floating platform screaming, "Game over!" That was one of... You just redlined that thing. Raul Julia was one of the best things about this movie, bar none. He's having a ball.
But for me, it was Tuesday.
That's an iconic line from a movie that is not great. It is legitimately a badass line.
Yeah.
Because he said, because Chun-Li in the movie is a reporter who is using her position to sneak in and confront Bison, and she does, and she says, and she tells the story of how she murdered his father, who was the chief.
Bison murdered her father. Right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And raised her village. And he says, well, for you, the day Bison graced your village was the greatest day of your life. But for me, it was only Tuesday. It's like, that's a legitimately great line. And Raul Julia delivers it perfectly. Like, and it's like, it's interesting how they attempted to give a narrative to a fighting game which generally doesn't have one.
Well, and the story of why Raul Julia was even in that movie is tragic.
It is. Well, it was. He let his sons pick it because it was going to be his final role. He knew
he was dying of cancer.
He knew he didn't have much time, so he picked something that that his sons liked, and went and did it.
And gave it 110%.
He did. He nailed it.
Yep. That was his last film.
And it's like, and I think, I don't know. It's like Van Damme kind of treated it as just another one of his movies, but I think a lot of the other people in it kind of recognized it for what it was going to be, and you can tell they put it in there. Like, I wish I could remember his name. The guy who played Zangief is a comedic gem in that movie. There's a point where they send a bomb in to where like the bad guys are meeting to blow up their camp, and they see it on a video feed that this explosive is coming straight for the camp, and Zangief looks at the TV and goes, "Quick, change the channel." That's funny. I was like, I don't care. Yeah. That's funny. It's like both of those movies is like, as the video game movies, like video game movies.
They're both better than Double Dragon.
Oh God. Every time I think I've purged that from my memory, something brings it.
Isn't that also Jean-Claude Van Damme?
No.
What dragon movie am I thinking?
Robert Patrick is the bad guy in it.
Yes, he is. Blonde-haired, like badly bleached blonde.
Evil
Robert
crime
Patrick.
lord, yeah. And Alyssa Milano's in it too.
Yeah.
Oh wait, what am I thinking? The Dennis Rodman, Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Oh, you're thinking of Double Team?
Double Team.
There was another one they did too, and I think Double Team the one where it was also
Mickey Rourke is the villain.
And I think I might be thinking of a different one because
we should do a whole episode about Jean-Claude Van Damme films.
Because there's also one where Dane Cook is the sidekick.
I'm sorry?
Yes, one of the Dennis Rodman movies. Dane Cook is his sidekick. I don't think it was a Jean-Claude Van Damme one too.
Oh my God!
But there's a Dennis Rodman vehicle, and Dane Cook is his mouthy sidekick.
Mouthy sidekick. Wow. I do have.
He's playing the Rob Schneider role.
You've seen Mr. Brooks, haven't you?
I've seen the beginning of Mr. Brooks. I never went back and finished that film. I understand Dane Cook's actually pretty good
He's
in it.
actually really good in it, and Kevin Costner they're really great together.
Stan, did you have any more nostalgia-filtered loves that you would like to share with us before we wrap up?
Can I talk more about Day After Tomorrow?
No. Chris, did you have any more honorable mentions?
I have. This is not an honorable mention. This is my fifth entry, technically.
Okay.
Did you have any other to toss out?
No. Okay. I covered my terrible
I've got
ones.
the one. I know we've talked about it off mic. It weirdly has come up a few times, but this is a movie I caught because there have been good movies and bad movies I've seen because for the longest time we had HBO, and it's just like stuff would always just be on to fill time. And one of the number ones of that I caught, and I was like weirdly intrigued by. I know it's not I kind of knew then, but I definitely know now. Not a good movie, but fun to watch. It is Weekend at Bernie's 2. Not the first one, the second one.
Weekend at Bernie's has come up a considerable, like, uncomfortable amount on this podcast.
Now, just in
Or
here,
just in our conversation.
and I need to explain why. And why is the basic summary of this movie. Immediately after the events of Weekend at Bernie's, they are clearing, they basically, like, they're trying to get, the two main characters are trying to get their lives back together. Well, Bernie apparently hid a substantial amount of money in, like, an offshore account or something. So the people who hid that money from, they want it back. So what do? They hire a voodoo queen who sends two goons to raise Bernie's body into a zombie form so that it will lead them to where he stashed this money. It's not in an account. It's like buried somewhere in the Caribbean. So they fuck up. They steal the body and they fuck up. So the body isn't conscious. He's not a full zombie. He will only rise and move to where he needs to go when he hears music. So I don't remember how this all comes together, but they all end up in the Caribbean using a headphone on Bernie's body as it wanders mindlessly to where the treasure is hidden, and they're all tracking it. And that is the entirety of this movie.
That sounds delightfully bad.
It is. It's like, this should have been like an animated movie. It is nothing but a cartoon. And that's something that I think a lot of, like, 80s to early 90s movies in particular had an issue with. Like, they have this weird concept especially for a comedy that hits big. So what do they think they have to do? They think they have to go bigger and weirder and wackier for the second to make it better than the first. And it's just, it's like the first one was just a farce about this guy's boss. He is a jerk. He's an ass. But they're going to house sit for him. Well, he dies. So what do? They prop him up and they pretend like he's still alive. Like, that's a realistic but farcical thing that can happen. And then it goes to this.
Voodoo Curse.
Voodoo Curse with walking/dancing dead body. There is a scene where after he has been reanimated, he's had an arrow through his head, which they have to use that, like, channel the headphones through at that point. And at some point he ends up underwater, walking/dancing to the music. And to his credit, that's the actor from the first film who played Bernie doing all of that stuff.
Who is the actor that plays Bernie?
I don't know. But it
did because it's Andrew McCarthy is in the first one, right?
He is, and Jonathan Silverman.
Is he in? Are they both in the second one too?
Yes, they are. They come back for it. It's
They needed the money.
But I think that may have been the tipping point of both of their careers, too.
Well, Jonathan Silverman later had a sitcom called The Single Guy, which I only know about. It had like a couple season run, and I know that because USA used to rerun it constantly. But Ming-Na Wen was on that sitcom.
Wow. Harrowing stuff, Chris. All right. Well, on that note...
Why do the things I share turn terrible for you?
On that note, we are going to wrap up this episode about the Nostalgia Filter. If you have any thoughts that you'd like to share
or you want to talk about Day After Tomorrow.
Or no, we're not going to talk about it. You can email those directly to Stan.
Holy crap. I'm sorry. Weekend at Bernie's 1 was made in 89. They made the second one in 93.
Well, they had to have that extra time to really hash out that story and make it everything that it could be.
Voodoo Curse.
Oh, and the Terry Kaiser was the actor who played Bernie.
Terry Kaiser.
Yeah, Voodoo Curse by itself just wasn't good enough. They really had to iron out that plot. Anyway.
We can stop now.
If you have any great loves that you recognize are pretty terrible, but you love them anyway because of the nostalgia associated.
My friends.
Shoot me an email. Let me know what your thoughts are. david.longwalk@gmail.com. You can visit us online at longwalk.us, or you can like us on Facebook, facebook.com/longwalkpro. Thank you, Chris and Stan. I hope you guys had fun with that conversation.
Always a pleasure.
And we will be back in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Peace out.
Take that as the threat it's meant to be.